to suicide after abusing her for years has been cleared of her manslaughter. But a jury did find 30-year-old Ryan Wellings guilty of assault and coercive behaviour against Keighley. The King will travel to Poland later this month. It will mark 80 years since the liberation of Auschwitz. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 24 points at 82.24. The pound buys $1.21 and €1.16. LBC weather staying dry tonight across southern England, rain elsewhere and a low of -1. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 2 minutes past 8 on LBC. It's Iain Dale with you with Cross Question. On the panel tonight, to my left, Stella Creasy, Labour MP for Walthamstow. To her left, Robbie Moore, Conservative Shadow Environment Minister and MP for Keighley and Ilkley. Have you had Ilkley added?
I have, as a result of the new changes. I have.
That's quite good, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It better reflects the constituency makeup.
I need to get an invite to the Ilkley
Excuse me,
Literature
let's
Festival.
not diss classic.
What?
Classic constituency names, thank you very much. Walthamstow has stood the test of time.
It has. I used to live there. Paul Nowak is General Secretary for the Trades Union Congress, and sitting next to him is Nimco Ali, social activist who's Chief Executive of the anti-female genital mutilation charity, the Five Foundation. They are here, of course, to answer your questions. Lots in the news at the moment, isn't there? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can WhatsApp us on the same number. You can text 84850. And, of course, we'd love you to watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, let's start off with a text question from David in Bracknell, who says, should Rachel Reeves's job be on the line? I'll come to Robbie, seeing as you're slurping your coffee,
Sorry.
Stella.
Well, first of all, how embarrassing that the Prime Minister has had to release a clarification statement towards the end of today to say that Rachel Reeves is apparently going to stay in her job until the next election. But this is a serious issue. We see the pound absolutely plummeting, predicted to be around 1.2 US dollar. The markets are all over the place with huge amounts of uncertainty that's been created, no doubt by the Chancellor's budget. The gilt prices are at record highs, never been as high as they have for a significant number of years. And where is the Chancellor? Nowhere to be seen other than over in China. With her communist friends. Well, she's back maybe just now, but she wasn't in Parliament today when we were wanting to put questions to her.
Stella.
Just out of interest, Robbie, when the cost of insuring UK debt rocketed in June 2022, were you also calling for the resignation of the Chancellor, or is it just because it's a Labour Chancellor that you're applying a different set of metrics? Because it's nothing like the levels of cost and the way the markets reacted to Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss.
Stella.
So what is sauce for the goose has to be sauce for the gander, doesn't it?
Well, that works the other way around as well.
Well,
You were calling for Kwasi's resignation, I imagine.
Anything that looked... Well, actually, clearly I was. This is nothing like that. I get it. I get there's some politics around this, some knockabout fun about this. But fundamentally, Rachel Reeves is making some incredibly difficult, tough choices. The Conservatives seem to call for somebody else to go every single week or even day at the right now. You know, get a grip as to what you actually want to tell the country is your alternative to all of this, because that's what I haven't heard from you guys as yet, is if you wouldn't make these difficult choices to try and sort out the mess that you left after 14 years, and there has been some acknowledgement that you left a mess, what would you be doing instead?
Well, we certainly would not be making the choices
What would you do?
that you have, as the government have made so far. Let's be clear about this. When you've got the individuals like the chief economist of Barclays that are coming out saying that they are deeply concerned and that there is going to have to be, if there's no strategic change by the Chancellor, that there is going to have to be severe spending cuts. You have gilt prices at a record 27-year high based on 30-year prices. You have got others like other economists that are coming out saying that they have never seen it so bad. There is an incredible amount of uncertainty within the market conditions, and yet you have this uncertainty whether the Prime Minister today is going to be keeping the Chancellor in place.
You're absolutely just making my point. You haven't got a single idea about how to sort sort out the problems.
To be
in this
fair,
country. No, it's not.
To be fair,
Come on,
that's not the
Iain.
question. The question is, should
but that was the
Rachel Reeves'
question I
job
asked
be on
him,
the
and
line?
that's the question he's avoiding. If you want to put Rachel's job on the line, you have to come up with a better plan than the plan that she's come up with. You haven't got a single idea. You haven't got a single ounce of contrition that the fact we're in this mess are the choices that you guys made. Now, I'm somebody who questioned the value of accepting the national insurance cuts and the budget that you guys came up with. But Rachel has found a way to try and balance the books, and she's doing that. And the markets are responding to the fiscal decisions that she's making, and they're responding much better than they ever did under your government. You cannot come up with a single alternative policy, and that's the problem with all of this, Robbie. It's easy to throw words.
I know. Let me get in here, Stella. Let me get in.
I let him speak to hear what he was going to say.
I know. Everyone else is feeling very left out.
Do you have a policy proposal?
Don't do that. I let him speak. That's not fair.
Well, you're not letting him speak now.
Let's be honest about this. We would not have made the changes to employers' national insurance. We have not spent £9 billion on pay increases to the public sector. That was a Labour choice that was made based on this fiscal scenario that keeps getting put out by every single Labour politician when they're giving a speech in the chamber about £22 billion black hole, which just has been proven not to have existed. It just seems to be a soundbite that's constantly being put out by the Labour Party.
Paul Nowak.
Should Rachel Reeves' job be on the line? Absolutely not. And Robbie knows. I mean, we have got huge uncertainty in global markets, gilt prices in particular. That wasn't caused by the budget. It's caused by we got the incoming Trump presidency. Nobody knows quite what's going to happen around tariffs, the potential of global trade wars. That's what's causing the nervousness in the market. Now, Rachel did make some difficult decisions in that budget, but fundamentally, I think she made the right decisions. £26 billion into our NHS over the course of the next 2 years. Important for people stuck on those waiting lists. I was talking to an employers' organisation today. One of the big problems is they can't get people back into work because they're stuck on NHS waiting lists, whether they're waiting for treatments for around the back or for mental health conditions. So it is about fixing the fundamentals of the economy. Has Rachel got everything right? Absolutely not, no chance of the world. But I think in terms of the cards she was dealt with as incoming Chancellor, she's made the big calls and the right calls.
If you come into power saying that my main agenda is to create economic growth or create the conditions where the economy can grow, and the first quarter the first quarter shows that the economy isn't growing at all, and there are some very worrying signs from business about business confidence. When you've made that your main aim, and it's patently we're not going to have much growth this year, it seems now, I mean, you've got to question the policies, haven't you?
No, I think fundamentally she's made the right choices, Iain. I'll give you an example. Things like the National Wealth Fund, down payments on a proper, coherent industrial strategy so that we're protecting and creating good quality jobs. That investment into our public services, desperately needed. There isn't one public service now, ask the punters, ask the public, that's better now than it was 14 years ago. Decade and a half of underinvestment. And you know, the forecasts will always be mixed. The OECD were talking about the UK being one of the fastest growing economies over the course of the next 12 months, just a couple of weeks ago. I think that the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. I think she's made the right calls, big calls, but calls that were needed to get the economy kick-started, and crucially to get money into people's pockets. I mean, things like that increase in the national minimum wage that's coming in March will make a difference to millions of low-paid workers.
But the national insurance rise will affect workers. I mean, it's the employers that will have to pay it, but it means that there won't be as many pay rises, which you surely have to be concerned about.
Let's take that with a huge pinch of salt. One of our big high street supermarkets was complaining about the national insurance contribution rise, that it was going to cost them £250 million a year, and was warning that was going to have to come out of wages, or the prices would have to go up. That same supermarket makes £2.5 billion in profits last year, and the only thing that's sacrosanct is dividends. So actually, I don't think it will have a negative impact on wages, and certainly our unions will be pushing for decent pay rises.
Time will tell. Nimco?
Well, I think everybody's job should always be on the line. I think it was wrong of the Prime Minister to actually make a commitment to himself, saying that she'll be there until the next general election.
Well, he had to, because he made it for David Lammy, didn't he?
I know. Well, I think he should make it for Damien Lamy either. I think everybody should be judged by what they're doing. You know, I'm not necessarily sure if Rachel's being just dealt by some bad luck, or whether it's the kind of the decisions that she's made. But one thing I can say is that she's actually quite famous within the young people that never really used to take any interest in politics. I think she's one of those people that everybody's talking about. Those of us that live in London are actually feeling the pinch. I think everybody's very uncomfortable in terms of the uncertainty that's happening at the moment. But I think she should be given a chance. I feel I just feel a little bit bad for her as well at the moment.
Why?
I don't. Maybe I don't know. Maybe it's because she's just been in that job as a shadow chancellor for such a long time. I think there was so much hope and there was so much confidence when she was going in. I think Labour are just going through their growing pains at the moment. I'm hoping, Stella, because it has actually been quite embarrassing for the last 6 months or so.
Do you think that's a fair point? That very few ministers that are in the cabinet, or indeed junior ministers, have much experience of government, and therefore they are naturally finding their way, and maybe can't sort of pull the levers of government in the way that maybe Ed Miliband is doing. I mean, I don't know if you saw that thing last week.
Never thought I'd hear you, Ian, describing yourself as a fan of Ed.
I've always been. It was me that tipped him to be Labour leader back in. I was the first one to do that back in 2009.
There we go.
So,
Look,
but you take the point.
No, absolutely, I take the point. You've got a whole new administration. Frankly, we've got a whole majority of Parliament is new. What isn't new is Conservatives trying to tell us that they left the country in a good state when the public know the opposite. They know that there was a gap in the finances. So whoever was going to come into it was dealing with a mess that had been delayed. If that wasn't the case, I'd have my new local hospital at Whipps Cross. But the Tories kept delaying it until they had to admit there wasn't the money there for it because there was a massive hole in our economy. So whoever was coming in was going to face some really difficult challenges. Nimco's also right that we've got a really difficult, uncertain environment that we're all operating in right now. If we're all honest, nobody necessarily expected that President Trump was going to win. You're right, the markets are very uncertain. They are uncertain about what's going to happen with Ukraine, with Putin. We're hopefully going to get onto this. There might be some good news coming from the Middle East, finally.
Coming up next.
It all creates uncertainty, and markets don't like uncertainty. But none of us can afford to soft-soap ourselves about this. The question is, what is actually going to happen? What's going to make a difference for our constituents? Are we going to get the jobs we need, the growth we need, the investment that we need to put right all the problems that we now have in this country that mean that when all those world events come, we are very much at the sharp end of it? Someone like me says, look, absolutely there are challenges to make, but this also calls for boldness about things like resetting our relationship with Europe and getting trade back and getting security back by working with our neighbours. There aren't any easy choices to make, but there is easy accountability, Robbie, and I'm not going to let you get away with trying to say that there wasn't a hole in the fiscal policy. Even the OBR was embarrassed for your government for the mess.
The OBR said it was 9 billion, not 22.
So no one other than Labour MPs are trotting out the line of the 22 billion black hole. No one else is accepting it, and you get out on the doorstep in places like Keighley and they think that the Labour government at the moment is a bit of a joke because they're going against everything that they promised they wouldn't do.
They
said they wouldn't raise national insurance. They have. They
said they wouldn't raise taxes on working people, and they haven't.
You speak to any business, and they are having to absorb that cost that is going to be
implemented. And talk about promises that Labour have kept. They said they bring forward an employment rights bill within the first 100 days of a Labour government, something that would tackle 0 hours.
How's that going to create growth, by the way?
Well, absolutely will create growth, because funnily enough, when people are in well-paid, secure employment, it has a positive impact on the wider economy. And that's why, actually, we surveyed a big survey of over 1,000 employers, large, small, medium employers with the IPPR. 70% of those employers said that they thought day one employment rights would help boost productivity, that they thought it was right to clamp down on things like 0 hours contracts. Why? Because good employers are being undercut by bad employers at the moment. They're getting away with it. The cowboys are getting away with it. So, and actually the interesting thing about that agenda, it doesn't matter whether you voted Tory at the last election, Lib Dem, Reform, Labour, people support the proposals on Labour's plan to make work pay, and they are delivering on that agenda, and it will make a difference to millions of people.
The challenge there, though, is the cost is then to the business. The business is then having to absorb that additional overhead.
Good businesses already have those costs. They're being undercut by the employees who do use 0 hours.
The businesses will then be having to make the decision on how many people they can afford to employ, and that will have a negative impact on growth.
What you're talking about is a race to the bottom. The reality is most employers in this country do play sick pay from day one. Most employers don't use 0 hours contracts. Most employers wouldn't dream of sacking staff unfairly within the first 2 years of their employment, but bad employers do, and this law will level the playing field for good employers.
Right, we are going to grant Stella her wish, and we're going to move on to Israel. But we'll have a break first. It's 8:15.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Labour MP Stella Creasy, Conservative MP Robbie Moore, Paul Nowak, General Secretary of the Trades Union Congress, and Nimco Ali, the social activist. They are here answering your questions. 0345 6060 973. Next one, text question from Jennifer in Lowestoft. If there is a ceasefire in Israel and Gaza this week, is it down to Donald Trump? Now, you might think that's a strange question, but his envoy to the Middle East does seem to have played quite a leading role in brokering this deal, alleged deal in Qatar. Paul?
I think it'd be a stretch to say it's down to Donald Trump, but frankly, Ian, the most important thing is that there is a ceasefire and there is the beginnings of a lasting peace. And we know we're going to have a Trump presidency in 10 or 11 days time. I'd hope that Trump presidency continues that peace process if it comes into play, and that we move towards a lasting two-state solution, because I think that is the only long-term solution in the Middle East. So frankly, people can claim whoever they want as the mother or father of that particular success, but the key thing is tackling that humanitarian crisis and getting a ceasefire in place.
Do you think that within 10 years there could ever be a two-state solution, given the fact we have an Israeli government that doesn't want a two-state solution, given the fact that, Hamas certainly don't, what one can argue about the Palestinian Authority, but you've got to have two sides wanting a tango, haven't you?
Well, absolutely. And currently the current Israeli government, I don't think does believe in a two-state solution, but I think it's what the overwhelming majority of people in Israel and in Palestine want, and that's got to be the right starting point.
Some people think it should be imposed.
Who's going to impose it then?
I don't know how that would happen.
No,
you hear that?
I think you've just got to have the whole of the international community acting as honest brokers and starting from that point of view, that point that actually the two-state solution is the only route to a lasting peace in the Middle East.
Nimco?
I think, a lot of people might not agree, but I think it is down to Trump. I don't think a lot of these people, a lot of those in the Middle East, specifically Hamas and also Qatar, their kind of brokers actually want to deal with, and they want to deal with Trump in terms of the way that he's spoken. So I do think, Trump coming in has a lot to do with this peace deal, but I think ultimately there has also been negotiations behind the scenes in order to make this happen. And I think he's also going to do something in Ukraine as well. So I'm not really.
Well, that's going to be the real interesting one, isn't it? What happens there?
But I think that war's going to end as well. I think it'd be really interesting. But what I'm really more concerned about is that Trump won't necessarily turn towards Africa and stop a lot of things that are happening there. So as much as we've been focusing on Gaza and Ukraine, I think there's been a lot of things that have been happening in Sudan and other places which Trump doesn't seem to be interested in.
Robbie?
Well, I think without doubt, with the Trump presidency coming down the line in 10 days or so, and
no, it's a week.
A week now. Christ.
This time, in a week's time, we will have heard Trump's inauguration speech.
In a week's time, and also the press conference that happened, where he gave his very strong views about if there was no conclusion that was reached. To use his quote, "All hell will break loose," I think has undoubtedly put pressure on making sure that there was a conclusion reached, if at all possible. I hope there absolutely is. Crikey. We need to be making sure that there is a ceasefire that's reached, that there is those hostages that are released, and that there is a peaceful conclusion. I concur on the fact of needing to ultimately reach a two-state solution. But coming back to the original question, I do think without doubt that Trump has put pressure on this scenario, just from the fact that he will be taking on the presidency in a week's time.
Stella?
Look, I think we're all in agreement that it inevitably creates a cut-off point. I also want to be cautious just because we have been here before. We've been at the point where we thought there was progress being made, where we thought we might see... my heart goes out to... I've got one of the hostage families in my constituency. I've worked with them over the last year or so, and it is absolutely heartbreaking. I'm also acutely aware of the devastation in Gaza, the devastation in Lebanon. I had constituents who were trying to get back from Lebanon. I've got people who've got family members in Gaza. There's going to have to be accountability for what has happened. We can't deny that now. This has gone on. This has been too entrenched. I think there's also a question about, look, what is the plan for what is left of Gaza, what is left of Lebanon? How do you start the process where people can come together? Paul is absolutely right. We've got to be really clear the difference between the Israeli people and the Israeli government, the Palestinian people and the Palestinian government. The Israelis and the Palestinians have both been failed by their political leadership, and thousands of people have paid with their lives as a result. rebuilding some form of nation to be able to have the conversation about what that future has to be the priority. That's not just about aid, that is about basic infrastructure. It is about the horrific scenes that we've seen over the last couple of weeks where literally there have been babies freezing to death because there is nothing left in Gaza to be able to bring people into shelter. But do we need to make that happen? Do we want to ask Trump to be the leader he wants to be in making that happen? If it takes Trump, it takes Trump. I just think we have to be cautious. We've been here before. And the scale of the challenge, the hurt that goes so deep, the accountability that is required is so great that this is not going to be an overnight process.
I think we also have to give credit that Trump does have history in this region with the Abraham Accords and the fact that, that you now have in Abu Dhabi a synagogue, a mosque and a church all next to each other, the Middle East having Israelis and Jewish people being able to visit. So I do think as much as he's a bit of a caveat, that he does throw a caveat, and I think he does have an understanding which people don't give him credit for, and I think there is
let me be very clear. I'm not with those people who want to write Trump off as a joke. I think he's a very serious man. He's a very serious businessman. And it's because he has that capacity that it presents a very serious concern within the world, because it is erratic how it is applied. That's the challenge here, not that he's a joke.
I would also give some credit to the British government, actually. Sort of whether it was the reinstatement of the funding of UNRWA, the consistent call for a ceasefire, the suspension of the arms licences. I mean, there are lots of people who would wanted Labour to have gone further, but I think that they've played an important part as well. And I think they can play a further part in terms of recognition of the state of Palestine. And they've talked about that as a manifesto commitment, and obviously there's a question about timing, but that is an essential element of that two-state solution.
Well, nobody should ever forget that actually in 2014 we led the call for the recognition of Palestine. I voted to recognise Palestine in 2014 because I've always believed if you have two states, you start by recognising there are two states that exist. I just also think we have to recognise there is so little left of infrastructure in Gaza that in itself will need to be rebuilt before you can have those conversations, to bring civic society in and to perhaps address some of those concerns about the Israeli political culture that led us to this point.
Right, let's take another question from Mary, who says, whose fault is it that corridor care is becoming the norm in the NHS, and how do we fix it? I was reading a newspaper story this morning about specific jobs being advertised for people to specifically work in corridors. And you think, well, has it really come to this? Nimco?
I think my biggest bugbear with the NHS is GPs. I think GPs are fundamentally...
Well, that's not the question.
No, but this is the NHS, so we're talking about the ways to fix the NHS. I think if GPs were regulated and they were able to listen to their patients and able to get a GP appointment, I don't think a lot of people would have to attend accident emergency or have to wait till they're in acute conditions in order to enter the NHS. I think we have to have a conversation of the way that we deal with public health in this country. I think there needs to be better investments in things like asthma or diabetes or even obesity. But for me, I think the main thing is that there's kind of hold that GPs have on data and patients, and if that is kind of actually relaxed, then we might be able to give patients choices and able to see other people that can treat their elements.
Okay, Robbie?
Well, certainly funding is an issue, and when we were in government, we put the most amount of funding that had been going into the NHS since it started, increasing its annual contribution. But what's clear is it's not dealing with the absolute problem that's just been raised by your caller. There is still those challenges, there is still those winter peaks that exist where there is further demand put on the NHS. And therefore it is about looking at a proper workplace plan. It is about proper efficiency that needs to be driven in within the health service. But I do see, even in my own constituency, where we've had a lot of focus on making sure we get the rebuild of Airedale Hospital, for example, and a lot of focus is quite rightly put on our hospital environments. But not as much focus, I feel, has been put on community-based care and making sure that the focus is on our GP practices and making sure that that connectivity between referrals from GPs, the primary care offering, to hospitals is as efficient and as slick as it can be. And I do think that there is efficiencies that need to be made so that it is beneficial in terms of the outcomes to the patient.
In terms of the question about corridor care, surely the key issue is the continuing decline in the number of hospital beds, which has been going on for 40 years now. If that isn't reversed, you're always going to have this problem at peak times like now.
But I think it's actually about moving the patient through the system. So if you can't move the patient when they're able to move out of the hospital and they have an appropriate place to go and receive that further care, or perhaps they don't have that level of care in the home environment that they should do, or perhaps the community care nurses aren't able, or there isn't enough capacity of them to look after that patient when they've moved beyond the hospital, you then do obviously end up with the bed locking, and then therefore patients unfortunately ending up in the corridor. So I think it's the whole system has to be properly looked at, not just looking at it in isolation in the hospital environment.
Stella.
I mean, Robbie, if you're calling to rip up the Lansley reforms, you and I will find common concern, because part of the things that you're talking about are the crisis that was created in the NHS, where there isn't any consistency about who is accountable. And if I am frustrated about the funding for the NHS and the fact that there just wasn't the money there, it's because my local hospital, Whipps Cross, we've been doing corridor care for some time now because it desperately needs rebuilding, because you cannot literally get the patients around the hospital. So when you have moments like this where lots of people have got flu and developed pneumonia and need to come into hospital, I mean, I had nurses almost crying, so upset and ashamed about the care that they were able to provide in that environment in my local hospital that desperately needs rebuilding. There are a myriad of problems.
Need Jackie Smith back running it. That's what you need.
Well, I mean, she left us to go and sort out further education, and it's like apples and pears for me. But just generally, Jackie Smith. We all want Jackie Smith back. Let's be
tell me about
clear
it.
About that, to knock some heads together. Look, it needs funding. It needs rebuilding. That requires to getting the money into investment before you can get onto the preventative care that you're talking about. And yes, absolutely, I'm somebody who thinks we do need to look at those questions about reform, because also the biggest question, well, this is social care. Look, there's loads of people in hospital right now who can't go to the social care places that they need to. We haven't had the investment in social care. You did starve it of funds, so there just aren't the places there that when you get people stuck in hospital who could leave, so that you can make space for a bed for someone to be treated who's got pneumonia.
How confident are you that by the end of the first term of a Labour government, we will all be able to almost feel the changes in the NHS and social care system? Because, I mean, there's all this phrase about it's like an oil tanker. It's very difficult. Super tanker. It's very difficult to turn round, and I just wonder how people are going to be able to judge that.
So I absolutely think you will feel the difference. Whether it will be the complete difference will be the challenge, because we are also talking about a generational thing. Look, one of the reasons why there's been a decline in beds is because Nimco's right. We're all now suffering with more longer-term conditions that actually, for me as a socialist, I want to see people being treated early. I don't want to wait till they get sick enough to need a hospital bed. In my community, where you've got high levels of heart disease, cancer and diabetes, I want people to be kept well, because that's the most progressive outcome. That does require those community...
I'm not sure why that's a socialist thing. I think surely everyone wants that.
Well, because it means you have to care about people. I'm a drama, But
also,
it means you have to care about the fact that you can't make the NHS run through profiteering, and that's what the Lansley reforms just broke up the NHS to the point, but nobody's being held accountable. Yeah. There are so many cases I've had where I'm just chasing people around and around.
I want to bring Paul in.
Yeah. So who's responsible? I'm clear, and I think the voters are clear. It was the last government. So it was 14 years of neglect of not just the NHS or public services generally, and you can see it in a couple of things, because you can put money into the NHS, but if you're pulling hundreds of millions of pounds out of local government, people with drug and alcohol problems turn up at A&E, and they add to the problems and the pressures in our hospitals. Social care, I mean, I'm old enough to remember when Boris Johnson was our Prime Minister and told us he'd fix social care, and it didn't quite happen. We've got 240,000 staff vacancies in the NHS and social care. You can't fix the NHS and social care without addressing that issue. And in social care, a quarter of the staff are on 0 hours contracts. The minimum wage is the default wage across large parts of the sector, and we can't get people to work in social care. So what difference can the government make, as well as funding and Rachel's commitments in the budget? As part of that Make Work Pay programme, Labour's going to introduce a fair pay agreement in social care, bringing together social care providers, the public sector, unions, to think about, well, what does career progression look like in social care? How do you drive up job satisfaction, get more people to work in the sector? Because at the end of the day, we can't attract people to work in social care. So I think, I would be hopeful, Ian, that we will see tangible improvements in the NHS and social care by the end of the Parliament. I don't think you're going to fix all of those problems overnight, but we're heading in the right direction.
And unfortunately, elements in the budget again did not help. You speak to the GPs in my constituency that are complaining complaining to me that as a result of the employer's national insurance, it is now costing those GP practices more, and my GPs are now having to make decisions about not recruiting GPs or nurses to work in their GP practices as a result of the budget changes with NI. So that is a demonstration of those measures being brought in by this government that we have now having a negative impact on the amount of care that can be provided within communities like mine and Keighley.
And £26 billion over 2 years into the NHS, Robbie, which will have a fundamental transformative effect, I think, right across the health system.
Most of it's going to extra pay, isn't it?
Well, some of it will go to extra pay, and rightly so, because you can't fix...
no outcomes associated with it.
No, come on,
You can't
that's
fix the
not
problems in the
completely
NHS without addressing the staffing crisis. And actually, there are lots of things as well. I mean, you talk to our members, whether they're radiographers or nurses, they're really interested in things like flexible working. The only way that many people in the NHS can get flexible working at the moment is to leave the NHS and go and work through an agency, which costs the NHS more.
Also,
So
look, Paul is right about this. We've got so many people not getting the care they need, so they can't work because so many of our doctors and nurses had to be on strike to get basic pay and conditions. Sorting that has already brought in extra capacity into the NHS. Of course,
more from our panel in just a moment. It's 8:32. News headlines on LBC with Daryl Jackson.
Joe Biden says a Gaza ceasefire deal is on the brink. The outgoing US president, giving his final foreign policy address, says it will include a hostage release deal and a surge of aid to Palestinians. Downing Street says Rachel Reeves' long-term future is secure and will remain as Chancellor for the whole of this Parliament. She's under growing pressure due to rising borrowing costs. And a man who was accused of driving his partner to suicide after abusing her for years has been cleared of her manslaughter. But a jury did find 30-year-old Ryan Wellings guilty of assault and coercive behaviour against Keighley. LBC weather staying dry tonight across southern England, rain elsewhere and a low of -1.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
It's 25 to 9 on LBC. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to put a question to our panel. Lots of you doing so on the text this evening. Fewer of you doing it on the phones, it has to be said. Not quite sure why that is. Let's take a text question from Jason in Stirling. Is it really a good idea to give drug addicts more drugs? Now, Britain's first drug consumption room has opened in Glasgow today under a pilot scheme backed by the Scottish Government. Now, inevitably, this is a very controversial decision by the Scottish Government to do this. Robbie, do you think it can work?
I am very, very sceptical about this. want to say that I'm absolutely would not be favourable of it at all. I would want to see what the Scottish Government are basing their facts on to be able to roll out this measure in Glasgow. I'd yet to be convinced, absolutely.
Is it worth trying something new though? Because so many initiatives in this area. I mean, if you take the basic view that everybody should say no to drugs, that there hasn't been any real initiative over the last 30 years that has proved that works. Do we not have to think a little bit more differently, even if it goes against some natural instincts?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. You need to think differently, and you need to look at the evidence that's been put before you. I'm not party to that, I have to say, and quite rightly, instinctively, I feel that it would not necessarily be a good thing, but let's just see what the Scottish Government are exploring up in Glasgow. It seems like it's not the right thing to do. If you've got drug addicts that are giving them more drugs, how that can ascertain getting them off that addiction. But hey, I might be coming across completely naive on this and needing to see. Open to seeing the results, but a huge amount of caution I think needs to be attached to that.
Nimco.
I guess you can kind of see it as an intervention in order to protect the NHS. So if you're giving people a safe environment in order to administer or take drugs, then you're avoiding the the overdoses and shared needles and infections and all that other kind of stuff. So like you were saying, I think it just waits to be seen. I'm not necessarily sure if are they giving them the drugs or they're just giving them the space in order to take the drugs legally. I mean, not legally, but safely.
I don't know the detail.
See, that's what I mean. I think the devil, it is about the detail. But I do ultimately think that actually supporting people in addiction is really needed, and I'm sure there's some evidence base behind this conversation, and I'm sure there's more kind of therapy and things that are available for when people get desperate in that kind of situation. I don't necessarily think anybody would want to go into a space where they're vulnerable and being able to be seen by others unless they were really desperate. So yeah, ultimately, I think this might be a safety mechanism, essentially.
Paul?
Yeah, I'm not an expert, Ian, but I think anything that has the potential to reduce harm has certainly got to be worth exploring. I mean, the very definition of madness is doing the same thing time and time again and expecting a different result, and clearly we've seen actually a sharp rise in drug-related deaths. I mean, I think in 2003 5,500 people died in drug-related overdoses and fatalities, highest since records began in 1993. So you've got to do something. I don't think in and of itself it's the only thing that we need to do. I mean, a lot of this is about working class kids living in communities that got left behind, and those sort of deindustrialised parts of the north of Scotland in particular, it's had an impact on those communities in the long term. So you've also got to think about other things to address those underlying issues, but anything that has the potential to reduce harm, I think you've got to explore and give a fair crack of the whip.
And if you look at the statistics, I mean, Scotland is by far and away the drug death capital of Europe, and by a huge margin, and I've never quite understood why it's so different to England, Wales and Northern Ireland.
I think that's to do with the environment as well, in terms of climate and everything else, and poverty. I think it all kind of intersects in order to provide situations.
But there are equally poor parts of England.
But I said climate as well, so I think Scotland's a lot colder. I think there's fewer people. I think there's things that really contribute to the deprivation that's in those kind of communities, and I think being left behind, whereas the north of England in terms of Bradford and other kind of places where we've just kind of really forgotten. I've been to places in London where you wouldn't actually assume was London because they've just been completely left behind, and drugs and all these things are there. So I do ultimately think Scotland has its major cities, but I think its rural communities have been left behind.
Okay, Stella.
Look, this is part of the reason why we as politicians sometimes have to put our knees back and not jerk them, isn't it? Because it sounds, by the headline, sensationalised. The reality is there's quite a lot of evidence now about treatment rooms and how they help you build relationships with those people who have an addiction, and it is a healthcare challenge. People are addicted to something. Helping people get off that isn't just about having a safe space, it is about the relationship you can build with them. I'm sure you've got drug and alcohol treatment people in your community as well. It's a really hard job to do, If we simply say no to everything because we think that makes us hardline, we may be missing out on something that actually could make a difference. So it's a pilot scheme. It's an opportunity to test whether it has an impact at all. And one of the things perhaps we've not been very good about in British politics is having the space to try something which can feel quite radical, quite brave, to see whether it will make a difference on something as intractable. We all need to, because I tell you, we all see the impact of drug addiction in our communities. We see the people whose lives are completely...
Do we, though?
Yes.
Because I wonder whether sort of the likes of us around this table, whether we actually see that. Well, you probably do as an MP.
Yeah.
No, I live in Camden, so you see,
Yeah.
you see the realities on a day-to-day basis, and you see the realities when it's cold, and anybody would think, well, why would you be outside in this kind of weather? But that need and that desperation is actually ultimately there. So
just locking people up,
Yeah.
just throwing the book at them isn't changing all of this. Now, that is not a call for deregulation. It's not a call to not take this stuff seriously, but it is to recognise if people have got an addiction, they need treatment help if you're ever going to break that cycle. And that's why, as hard as it is as politicians, sometimes we have to defend the space to do something different.
But the point being treatment here is that what I was saying is the question is giving more drugs to a drug
let's clarify that,
right
because they do not provide drugs. It's a space with professionals available to intervene if needed. Clean
so
injecting equipment may be provided, but not drugs.
So there's various forms of treatment that could be provided, and that's why I'm saying it's important to look
But
at
if you have an
the evidence
addiction,
that is out there.
It's not something you can turn off and on. This takes real work. That's the point about an addiction. So it probably will take. I mean, actually, if you've heard of this whole concept of cold turkey. If these are people already taking drugs. You're not giving them more drugs. You're trying to build a relationship with them to help them make better choices, because the alternative, which is throwing the book at them, is not working right now.
Right, before we come to another question, let's take a slightly early break. It's 8:43.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
We are in the company of Stella Creasy, Labour MP for my old stomping ground of Walthamstow. Haven't lived there since 1994, but I still regard it as a bit of sort of home. Robbie Moore, Conservative Shadow Environment Minister, MP for Keighley and Ilkley. Paul Nowak, General Secretary of the Trade Union Congress, and Nimco Ali, social activist and Chief Executive of the Five Foundation. Right, another question from Freddie. Is the government playing with fire by embracing AI? Now, there are some people in this world who, as soon as they hear the letters AI put together, completely switch off, and I admit to being one of them, Paul. Are you one of them?
I'm not one of them, no. No, I'm really excited by the potential of AI. Actually, I mean, I think it's got the potential to drive to drive productivity, to allow us to deliver services more effectively right across the public and private sector. I don't think it's without its problems, but I don't think we can stand sort of Canute-like and just expect AI to disappear. So for me, it's about how you shape the deployment of AI. Across the public and private sector, we want our members sat down with employers talking about how you can use this technology so it enhances people's quality of work.
But do you not fear that it'll replace your members?
No, I don't actually, Ian. I mean, if you look what the government announced today in public services, and we just talked about 240,000 vacancies in the NHS and social care. I think AI deployed in the right way, alongside skilled professional staff, can allow radiographers to do more interesting, varied work, and AI to do some of the routine stuff. So it's not AI or healthcare professionals. I think it's AI being deployed and used by healthcare professionals. I mean, more broadly in the private sector, unions, I mean, the TC's been around for, 155 years. We've always been at our best when we've not just responded to new technology, but when we've actually helped to shape the introduction of that technology. And I expect our members to do that in sectors, whether it's in the creative industries or in car plants or in public services. I do think there's a question about the digital dividend, though, as well. Who's going to benefit from all of this? If we do have that sort of digital dividend, improved productivity, are we going to allow Jeff Bezos just to send more rockets into space? Or are we going to use it to fund decent public services and sort of give people the right balance between work and life? So excited. I'm not in any way sort of naive about this, but I think shaped in the right way with the right regulatory safeguards and with workers at the heart of the conversation, it can be potentially really exciting.
Stella, we've been here before, haven't we? At the beginning of the 1980s, we could have asked the same question about computerisation, couldn't we?
I'm so sorry, Ian. I was too young to remember. Look,
you're a student of history, though, are you not?
Saying that you are for or against AI is like being for or against the weather. It's happening. Paul is right. There are huge opportunities for it. What you heard today was the government saying, look, we want to be at the forefront of that. It doesn't come without its challenges. I think Paul is right to talk about where is the digital dividend. I also think we have to be clear about people's rights within it. I think copyright is going to be a real issue in all of this. And I think, one of our strongest talents in this country is that we are incredibly creative when it comes to music, arts, film. It is going to be really important that we uphold the copyright rights of people in this country when you've got learning models that will replicate and use and develop from that, and the transparency. It's not impossible to do, but we need to start from the perspective this is about the public. If there's any lesson to learn, it is Tim Berners-Lee, isn't it? This is for everyone, which is what he said about the internet. If we're going to get this right, we have to... And within that, the other thing I would really encourage people to look at is Caroline Crado-Perez's research into AI and its gender biases, because that is really fascinating about why you're not actually going to be abolishing people just yet. Yeah. Because the data that so much of AI is developing on at the moment is so masculine. So when it comes, for example, in healthcare, things like heart attacks often get missed because the data is all being based on the male body and female symptoms don't get picked up. At its best, it will be things like that rather than more slick forms of marketing or dodgy videos that you see online, that I think people will really see the benefits of all of this. So but you can't stop it. What you need to do is be ahead of it.
Broadly optimistic.
I know.
Robbie?
Yeah, I'm optimistic as well. I think it's already with us in some sort of respect. And we're also already...
Is it in the room now, Robbie? Well, can you see it?
Who knows? Who knows? But it can absolutely lead to increased productivity, increased efficiency within businesses. I'm quite excited about what it can do for our public services. I think, as the points have already been made, regulation is absolutely key, and actually keeping at speed within which AI will inevitably move, and ensure that the state, through regulation and the appropriate regulation, that it allows AI to be creative enough to make sure it's delivering.
But the problem is that legislation in this area is always 10 years behind the technology,
that's the
isn't
problem.
it?
Yeah.
Probably 20.
Yeah, we've seen that even through the comments that have been made, for example, with the online safety bill. So I do think that actually, maybe this is an opportunity for Parliament or for legislators like Stella and I to look at actually how does Parliament become more nimble to be able to react when it needs to, and have we actually got the right. Is Parliament geared up to be allowed to enable legislation to come through the process as quickly as possible to deal with the fast-moving challenges that AI will pose to us all? But yes, optimistic, absolutely. I think it will lead to better outcomes for us all.
The good news is, Robbie, that the legislation in draft form already exists. The TUC published a green paper last year. We brought together AI experts from industry, from academia, as well as unions, including some of those things around safeguards. How do we make sure that people aren't managed solely by algorithm or recruited by algorithm and artificial intelligence? So there are lots of very practical things we can do, but absolutely getting the regulation right to allow the industry to flourish, I think, is absolutely essential.
Nimco.
Well, no, I completely agree about Parliament being more nimble about addressing it. So I think maybe the embracing means the fact that we can regulate it better, because I think AI is already here, and having worked on the online harms bill, I think at the moment it's because we've been so slow to embrace it. The dark web has been embraced, and I think a lot of people that are using AI right now are not using it for the good of people. They're actually using it in order to harm women. So I think this is a good thing in order for us to be able to regulate and really look at the harm it's doing, and then maybe override that with you using it for good.
I've become a great fan of ChatGPT, but you can't place all of your trust in these things, though, because often you type in something and it all looks completely convincing. You think, I'm sure that was December 1979 rather than December 1989. And you then start questioning yourself, and you find that you're right. So it's not infallible.
Are you telling us you're writing your books now using ChatGPT?
A lot of the research I am doing.
But I think that's a service.
I'm very careful not to plagiarise it, because that way lies madness. But you could easily, write a whole book now using it. But you can't actually. You do have to verify some of the things that it comes up with.
I mean, I'm gobsmacked, because I think that this is all moving so quickly. I always terrified when people write things in ChatGPT. There's always far too many exclamation marks, I find, in the stuff that they send you.
Well, for instance,
there's always going to be a role for creators and creatives in this.
I've just finished a book which I know you'll be first in the queue for,
obviously.
Stella, short biography of Margaret Thatcher, and I was writing the chapter on trade union reform, and I was thinking, well, I know there was a Trade Union Act in 1980 and 1982, but what about the others? So I just asked it, list all of the trade union acts from the 1980s. Now, that I could easily have done that in another way, but it was
that
just
must have been
there.
10 or 15 pages in and of itself.
It took 20 seconds to do, whereas it would have taken me a long time to research.
See, I really wish that everybody was using AI in order to do these kind of things. But for the last 4 to 5 years, I think AI has been used for really horrific things that we're just coming to terms with at the moment. And I think that is why it's great that the government's embracing, so then you can kind of deal with these kind of things. So we're talking about deep fakes, so we're talking about porn and all these things that are being created. I think that's the kind of AI that I've seen for the last year and a half.
Right,
those of us who are going to have to explain to our kids that there is pornography out there with our faces on it know that AI needs a lot of work.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to say.
No, it's not real.
Kieran in Hounslow says, Tony Blair says too many young people are deciding they have depression or ADHD. Why does that generation have such a lack of empathy to the young adults of today? Well, we're going to be talking about this on a 9 o'clock phone-in, so I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this. I rather provocatively in my talk-up said, are we breeding a generation of softy, namby-pamby snowflakes? And that seems to be what Tony Blair is kind of saying, Robbie.
Well, I don't know if I agree with his analogy. I would say there are some very robust individuals out there, that next generation coming through, that want to crack on and do the right thing. But
well, he's basically saying that people are self-diagnosing depression and ADHD. He does have a point.
I think he might have a personality issue with that lack of empathy that he shows in that. And it'd be interesting, sorry to interrupt, but it'd be really interesting to see what Alistair Campbell said to him after he said something as crass as that around the mental health crisis that we're facing, especially when we've just come out of lockdown and all these other things that young people have had to deal with, and also with the global insecurity around whether it's Trump, around their jobs, that there is a lot of sadness that is out there. And I think it's really unkind for him to say something like that.
But previous generations have had to cope with these sorts of things as well. This is not unique to this generation.
But I think so the generation that are raised in this generation that are able to communicate with them, understand that their parents were unable to deal with the issues that they had, so therefore we had to deal with it. So
they got on with that.
No, but they
That's
didn't,
what
because
Tony
it
Blair
often
would say.
manifested itself in alcohol abuse and domestic violence. And frankly, I'd rather that young people were talking about the issues that they face.
And young people have parents that have had counselling, so that they understand that their young people need support right now, so able to identify their needs. So I think it's not just unhelpful, but completely unkind. And I think if we were self-diagnosing people, I think I'll probably diagnose Tony Blair with some kind of...
Be careful.
I don't want to... I stopped myself, but a person who can't really empathise with others that have mental health.
Okay, now as an ultra Blairite, Stella Creasy.
I'm never an ultra anything. That's part of my problem. Look, there are different generations that understand better the challenges that people are facing, and that can be really difficult. Nobody can doubt it's really difficult for older generations to see some of the stuff that younger people are dealing with now and think, I don't know what to do to help you. You either have two choices. You either say, so I'm going to listen, or I'm going to dismiss. Listening bears a better outcome, and that's all I'd want to say to Tony Blair is that actually sit down, listen to these young people and see what you can learn from them, because it is difficult, it is disconcerting. Many of us have been challenged by this, it's a sign of we're all getting older, isn't it? But the idea that there aren't challenges with mental health
demonstrated to me that
all of us together,
all of us have to recognise that Friends is no longer the uncontested television choice du jour. Things move on.
Never seen an episode.
You've never seen an episode of Friends? Oh, Ian, you have so much to learn in life.
I don't.
Really?
No.
Yeah. But look, there is an issue where also there were millions of people who were undiagnosed with conditions that had they had help when they were earlier on, they might have had a different outcome in their life. One of the things I'm really proud about is my mum. My mum was a special school head teacher, and she ran a school in the 80s and 90s with young people that everybody else had given up on. Everyone else would say, pull yourself together. And she worked with those young people with their special educational needs to get them into education, to give them opportunities at a time when so many people wrote off young people. And it was always a lesson to me to grow up and live with those kids, to see the difference that somebody listening to them, somebody wanting the best for them, somebody challenging them and helping them made, because too often we don't do that to young people.
I think it's still the case, isn't it? Maybe I'm wrong, but suicide is the biggest killer of young men in this country. And frankly, I would rather young men and young women were talking about their issues and problems.
Eating disorders are still killing young women. That's a mental health issue.
So the more people talk about it, the better.
Right, let's move on to our fun question. Katie is in Islington. She's put this to you. A new podcast has been launched which features an AI version of the late Sir Michael Parkinson, interviewing some of the stars of today. His family have backed the project. I think his son's actually behind it. Who else should be revived by our big AI revolution? Paul?
Oh, I wish you weren't going to come to me first.
You've had 10 minutes to prepare your answer.
Yeah, and I can't think of anything pithy or amusing to say, to be quite honest with you. I mean, from my point of view, in terms of people that we've lost very recently, I always enjoyed watching Timothy West on the TV, whether it was in Brass or indeed with Prunella on canal programmes as a sort of fan of canals and the waterways. And so any way of capturing the spirit and the voice of Timothy West would be good enough for me.
He played a brilliant Churchill in Churchill and the Generals many, many years ago, which Stella's too young to remember.
Always.
Stella.
Have you been to see ABBA Voyage? Because
Yes.
I actually found it by the end quite an unsettling experience, where when they first came up, you thought, oh my gosh, this is extraordinary. They're in the room with us. And by the end, I was very obsessed with their fingers and what they looked like. But it did make me think at the time, God, who else would I like to see like this? George Michael? David Bowie, but it's still not quite the same as the real deal. I think we can all enjoy this.
But you believe it is.
By the end
That's
of
the
it,
thing,
it
though.
feels...
Somehow in
Come on,
that,
by the end of
you
ABBA,
believe
it
it.
felt also the fact they had to keep turning it off and on again because it all got too hot tells you there's a way to go on the technology.
I was 3 pints in, so I wasn't thinking about it. I was enjoying myself.
But it is really disconcerting. And, I'm a big fan of live music. I'd love to go and see more bands before perhaps they're not available to see anymore. And I'd love to make sure that we don't forget why it matters to be in the room with the real deal.
Well, I'm going to give a shout out to my favourite South African band, Mango Groove, who've been going for 40 years.
They're just too cool for me.
Yesterday, they played their 40th anniversary concert in Cape Town, which I should have gone to. And I'm told that they actually dedicated one of the songs to me live on stage. How about that?
See, and if that was AI, it just wouldn't feel the same.
Anyway, you don't need to bring them
wouldn't
back
get you
because they're
in the
still going. Robbie?
And I've also been to Abu Voyage, and it's an amazing experience because you're not quite sure if they're real to start with, and you're then working it out, and you're trying to work out...
It was the end bit when I
It's the end bit when it's...
But I thought they were there.
Yeah, I know, and I thought that they came on, and then I got very confused when the actual band was there playing. But who's someone very different? Look, I've been watching Wolf Hall recently. With Henry VIII and some of the characters.
Bring back Henry VIII.
And I have to say,
Today's modern Conservative Party.
That is played to type.
I know, but if you could go back in time, I don't know if it would be interesting just to see what these big characters were like that have had a huge impact on our history, going way, 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 way back. But just to experience what it would have been like living back there, or even
Boudica. Bring back Boudica.
I just thought I'd throw something different out there.
Please.
Culture Stick was always Boudica.
Was it?
Yeah.
Nimco.
I would like Cilla Black to be back.
Oh,
and I would like her to
Surprise!
No, blind date. And I'd like her to set up a dating app where you have Cilla Black and you're the chooser, and you get 3 men, you ask them the questions, and she can kind of pick it for you. So I thought that'd be a quite great thing.
Not Paul O'Grady.
No, Cilla Black. She was the original, ask the questions. And
I met her once.
Oh.
She was absolutely lovely.
No, I think she'd be amazing. So Cilla Black, I think, bring her back, but not Henry VIII. I think
What we're all doing is showing that we just don't think Saturday night telly is as good
exactly.
You're
anymore.
absolutely right on that. Thank you all very much indeed. Now, on tomorrow's panel, we have the journalist Emily Sheffield, Lib Dem Chief Whip, Wendy Chamberlain, former Conservative MP Jonathan Gullis, and the Good Growth Foundation think tank boss and former Labour candidate against Jeremy Corbyn, Praful Nargund. They will be here to answer your questions tomorrow night on LBC. Lots of love coming on my text screen from Mango Groove. Excellent. Look them up on YouTube. You will love them, I promise. Now, coming